Introducing our Democratic candidate for governor, Jay Inslee. Welcome.
Thank you.
Let me give you a brief bio, and then Jay's going to speak for a few minutes. So Jay Inslee is a fifth-generation Washingtonian. He grew up in the Seattle area and attended the UW. He married his high school sweetheart and raised his family in the Yakima Valley. He got his start in politics in his 30s in the State House of Representatives, and in 1992 he was elected to Congress, where he served 7 terms. Is that right? 7 terms until he resigned this spring to run for governor. And so he lives in Bainbridge Island, and from what I read is apparently an avid basketball player, and you've shared the court with President Obama. So we'll have to ask about that too. But we're going to let Jay say a few words at the beginning, then we're going to do some questions, and I'm going to open it up to all of you. Welcome.
All right, thank you. Thank you. Oh, I got one. I was going to shake hands.
Hi, I'm sorry.
Afternoon, I'm Jay Inslee. This is an absolute delight to be here. I wanted to share a particular data point that I think you'll be interested in to work into your algorithms. At 1197 Hawley Avenue on Bainbridge Island, we think the fair market value went up 5.8% yesterday when I completed a painting project that I started in May 2011. I hope that'll show up in an algorithm somewhere. It is a delight to be here because I think this group of people represents the best and the brightest and the true spirit of the state of Washington. I'm 5th generation son of the state of Washington, and I think we have a particular genius in our state, and that is the genius of innovation. We don't sell a lot of coal or oil in our state. We sell intellectual horsepower. And I'm dedicating myself to help build a working Washington, and I have a job creation plan aimed at getting people to work in our state, built on this one precept. We do something really, really well in the state of Washington. We invent, we create, we build. This is the secret sauce. And I have a job creation plan that is built around that fundamental tenet that we need to have a state that is dedicated every single way we can to enhance the prospects of entrepreneurs to in fact go out and create new products that can beat the world in many, many new technologies. Now, the reason I believe this fundamentally is I've lived it and I've seen it. I watched the first industrial revolution in aerospace. I watched a second in software and internet. And now I believe it is the destiny of the state to lead whole new technological revolutions in clean energy, in biotechnology, in life sciences, in real estate information systems that you are leading in. So I'm putting together a plan and have a plan and hope to work as a governor to make sure that we advance to the next realms of technological revolution. I just want to share a couple things that I've been involved in that have led me to be bullish and an optimist on our ability to do this. I served a few terms in Congress, and during that time I understood the power of what policies can do to help these new innovative technologies thrive. I'll give you an example. About 5 years ago, I wrote a book about clean energy, about how we create jobs through clean energy, and went to work trying to adopt some policies to help new industries thrive in that regard. Those policies are now working across the state of Washington. You might have read about a company called Energy 2. It's on the shores of Lake Union. They are the world's leading in nanotechnology use of ultracapacitors that you can marry it to a lithium-ion battery and increase capacity by 30%. The Western Hemisphere's first manufacturer of a low-head hydro with 0 CO2 emissions now has their system in the Rosa Canal in Selah, Washington, where I raised my 3 kids. The world's leading manufacturer of the most durable solar cell in the world is in Marysville, Washington at the Silicon Energy Company. We have a very bright destiny in clean energy. I have a plan to maximize that. You look at what's going on still in software and internet. I've been very active in helping internet-based industries thrive. When Pandora, how many people use Pandora, enjoy Pandora here? Pandora was on the doors of death 3 years ago when a copyright decision was essentially going to shut down their business model. I jumped into that and saved Pandora, or helped save Pandora, by solving that issue. And now the sky's the limit, and we know what a great technology it is. When Microsoft and other companies came to me and said, we need new spectrum to be able to adopt new technologies, I've been a leader in Congress in solving the problem of getting additional, more effective use of spectrum. Now, I mention these things because I believe we need a governor who is both knowledgeable about the challenges of innovative new companies, but has a plan to help them grow. And I have a plan to do that. So I'm very pleased to have a chance to talk with you today. That's my story. I'm sticking to it, and I look forward to your easy questions here. So.
Thank you. Well, Jay, I sent out an email the other day asking people what do they want to hear from you. And I got a lot of questions on education. It's something that's impacting most people in this room and lots of people in the state of Washington, and education at all levels. So let's start at the beginning. Let's start with primary education, and talk to me about your plan for improving education in Washington, and how this differs from your opponent.
Got it. Well, let me identify what I believe the two biggest challenges in the educational system. One is that we are first per capita in the number of high-tech jobs, so we get to beat our chest. We're a high-tech economy. But we are 46th in the production of people with the skill sets to do these jobs. We had 5,200 jobs opening for computational mathematicians last year. We only produced 2,000 people to do it. We had 600 people last year waiting to get into engineering school. That is one set of the challenges around STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math production. The second is that we have a scandal of people becoming economic casualties because they drop out and don't graduate from high school. 1 out of every 4 of our kids who starts grade school will not graduate from high school. 25% of our kids will become economic casualties on the race for middle-class jobs. Those are the two main challenges that I intend to do something about as governor. Now, there is no panacea or single silver bullet for any of these. Let me talk about some of the things we need to do. Let me start at the beginning, the very first thing we need to do, and that is to make sure every child has access to early childhood education. We know the neuroscience coming out of the University of Washington is very, very compelling. The single best thing you can do in education is making sure every child has an appropriate education starting in the very, very early years. That means all-day kindergarten. It means expansion of ECAP to get to these at-risk kids that we are not reaching. And now this is very important, is the achievement gap. We have huge differential between ethnic groups in the achievement gap. This is unacceptable. We know we can close this if we get the children early to help them solve with their particular problems. Second, we know the single most important thing in any school is the quality of the teacher. And I am focused like a laser beam to make sure we have a high-quality teacher in every single classroom. No excuses. And my educational reform program is sort of around a no excuses policy. I saw a sign at the Taft Academy. It's a STEM academy down at Federal Way, the Federal Way Public Schools. The teacher has it looks like a speed limit. It said excuse limit, 0. I think that's a pretty good foundational theory of an educational philosophy. So when I'm governor, we're going to have a policy that we have a very, very rigorous evaluation system for every teacher. And that will be used to make sure that we have quality teachers. And teachers that are not performing, we have a system that, in fact, that they'll be go find another career, frankly. We need to have a quality teacher in every single classroom, and I'm dedicated to make sure that happens. Now, to do that, the third thing we need to do is have very strong principals. Because when I'm going around the state, what I'm seeing is some really good success, but it's sporadic. We have the seeds for success, and where those seeds are growing is where you got a strong principal. So I'm proposing a residency program for principals. Fourth, I'm proposing a very strong innovative schools agenda. So we have an innovative schools initiative to both inspire and enable schools to embrace new innovation, online education, curriculum based on foreign languages, curriculum based on business. And I'm proposing a grants program so we give those schools a grant, and we free them of some of the regulations that are now inhibiting them of really going out and starting these innovative schools. I look at Lincoln Center in Tacoma, Delta and Tri-Cities, aviation here. We got to free these schools to embrace innovation, and we will when I am governor. Now on the higher ed side, we've got to focus on STEM education. And as we start to backfill the horrendous shortage we have with funding of our colleges, we've got to focus that money on STEM education. The legislature took a first step in that regard to make sure that we are matching the degree production with, in fact, the jobs that are out there. Now, this company knows how grievous the skills gap are finding people to fill these jobs. So I would target our funding that goes back to colleges into STEM education to make sure that we fill these jobs. Then obviously we got to help people with their tuition. Having gone broke twice trying to go through school, I know what that's like. And I have a program that will reinstitute a very useful low interest rate loan payment with the state of Washington. Now that's a quick rundown of where we need to go. It focuses on high expectations. It focuses on a child-centered educational system. Our system has to be based on the kids, not the adults in the system. And it's focused on no excuses. If we do this, I'm confident we can improve. By the way, those who don't believe we can improve in public education, I got to tell you, take a look at some of the things that are happening. You look at Renton School District. They've improved their graduation rates by about 20% in 3 years. Pasco, they've increased their graduation rate by about 25% in 3 years because they've adopted a no excuses policy by insisting on performance of everyone in their system. I'm bullish our ability to do this if we have a high expectation.
So on that topic of teacher performance, you talked about sort of weeding out the ones that aren't up to snuff. What about incentivizing the good ones? Are you in support of anything having to do with performance-based pay or something that would help the good ones to rise to the top?
Yeah, well, to start with, most teachers are not hugely motivated by getting rich. They're hugely motivated by performance. But I do have a provision that will give new teachers better mentoring by having excellent teachers going to a mentoring corps, and those teachers would have additional compensation. So yes, we do have a way of, in fact, creating additional compensation for excellent teachers who take on mentoring responsibilities. Now, I think this is really, really important because we have a huge turnover rate right now in our teacher corps, in part because we don't provide new teachers with new mentoring opportunities. So I would create a mentoring corps who would be additionally compensated to actually do that. I think this will be successful in improving teaching in our classroom. And when I talked about underperforming teachers, there are two things we need to do. One, we have to insist on a more rigorous evaluation system. But two, we have to make sure we use that evaluation system in decisions about hiring and riffing. And I'm insisting that we go further than the legislature has actually gone and make sure that that evaluation system is a significant part in any decision about who's going to be teaching in our schools. That's the next step that I support as governor.
Last week, I believe it was last week, enough signatures were gathered to put the topic of charter schools on a referendum this fall. And this is something I think this is the 4th time it's come up. But sort of relevant to us, there were some really high-profile donors to the cause to get this on the ballot from the technology community. What's your stance on charter schools in Washington?
Well, I applaud anyone looking for an avenue to bring more innovation to our schools, and I have, as I talked about, have proposed an initiative how to do that. I do have some concerns about this particular initiative in that right now we're under a court order to increase funds to our schools, which we didn't get to yet, about how we're going to increase funding for our schools. And I think it's difficult to see that right now we want to siphon off money out of the public schools at the same time we're under court order to maintain increasing contributions to our schools. So I'm not supportive of this particular approach, but what I am supportive of is ways to increase innovation throughout our school system. And I'm seeing this throughout our system. I mentioned the Taft Academy down at Federal Way. You go down there, it's by a Microsoft alum, And she is now bringing whole new ways of embracing computer-driven, online-driven educational systems. You go down and see them working with a whiteboard, where a whiteboard captures the way every student does a math problem, and then that student then teaches other students using that computer-driven system. This is dynamite stuff. You look at Clover Park school system, where they've improved the math instruction for their 5th grade teachers, and they close the achievement gap by 10%. This is great work. You look at the work that's going on at Lincoln Center. I think what we need to do is to make sure that type of innovation is spread throughout our system, and I have a plan to do that.
Last month in a debate, you and your opponent both talked about $1 billion in the budget if you're governor for public schools. Can you just kind of briefly outline for us, where does the $1 billion come from? Where does it go?
So our plan to fund public education is in 4 parts, 1 large part and 3 ancillary parts. The largest is getting people back to work. Look, we got to identify what the problem is. The problem is we have 300,000 people not working in our state. That's why state revenues have fallen off the cliff. That's primarily why we've been such a budget hole and an inability to finance education. So I have a plan, and you can see it at jinslee.com. I think we've brought some copies here today, which is focused on job creation. And is focused on, first, innovation, and second, it is a jobs plan not ideologically driven. I think too many people just take ideas from the right, or they take all the ideas from the left and they call it a jobs plan. Our plan is tailored for the talents of our state. Let me give you just one idea I'm excited about. We've got great research going on at the UW-WSU, but we are not commercializing that research like the University of Utah. We're not taking research from the lab bench and the computers and getting it into commercialized small businesses. If we increase the rate we commercialize that research at just half the rate of the University of Utah, we'll create $3 billion of economic activity in the state. So in my plan, we are going to free our research colleges to enter into equity arrangements with small businesses to actually get that research to actually start small businesses and get people to work. Now that's just one of my proposals. I hope you'll take a look at them. If you've got any ideas, I'd like to hear them. We've got to get people back to work. That's the driver of the revenue picture for the state of Washington. Now there's 3 other things that we got to do as well. 1, we need to embrace the lean management systems of total quality improvement like Boeing has used, like Virginia Mason has used. We've got to take the quality efficiency standards that have been used in private enterprise and bring it into state government. It's crazy we haven't done this in the past. We will do that when I'm governor. Third, we need to embrace a healthcare system that is based on preventative medicine. You know, we really don't have a healthcare system right now. We have a sick care system. We pay to amputate your leg after you get diabetes. We don't compensate the system to prevent you from getting diabetes in the first place. And I am the candidate in this race who has embraced a health care reform plan which will in fact focus on preventative health, that will in fact help the hundreds of thousands of people in our state who do not have insurance. This is imperative from an economic perspective so that we can start reducing the health care costs. Look, what's happened in the state is this. We've hollowed out money in our schools and we've put it into our health care system. We've got to reverse that trend by adopting the kind of thing that King County has adopted here that's saved $61 million the last couple of years. Now the 4th thing we need to do is close some of these obsolete loopholes that are not producing jobs and are hemorrhaging money out of schools, and I'm the candidate who's supportive of doing that. We do these 4 things, we're going to head back to the track of supporting our schools, and it won't happen overnight. But as a son of a teacher and father of 3 sons who've gone to public schools, I know how important this is. I'm going to be dedicated to this.
So the top 3 places that $1 billion would go in education, what is it?
Early childhood education, better mentoring for teachers, and STEM education and access to our higher ed. I'm going to stretch it and say 4 if that's okay.
On the higher ed subject, one of the challenges for Zillow is being able to find enough tech talent. There's a lot of competition in this region for tech talent, and it's only getting worse. And UW is just simply not churning out enough talent. They've got their limits on how many people they can graduate in the computer science program. I don't know if you saw, there was a New York Times article this weekend about how great that program is, and the dire need for more talent in this area. What can we do on the state level to be able to train more of this talent? There have been ideas for new universities, more universities, opening up the floodgates at the UW. I mean, what do you think?
Several things. Number one, I think the state needs to focus on this as a statewide challenge. Frankly, the state needs to be a little bit more directive on where our state money is going when it goes into our colleges. Historically, it's just gone on that colleges have decided what programs to support. Look, we've got to start focusing on these STEM degrees. And I've said that in my opening statement, I think, as we start to put more money back into colleges, now they've had 30 to 40% reductions in the last several years. As we start to rebuild that, we've got to insist that those dollars go to produce these degrees. This is an economic imperative for us. It is also where the jobs are, frankly. So the states and the governor is going to need to make sure that we direct that investment into these STEM degrees, number one. Number two, as I've said, we still have challenges to help for the financing of students, and that's why I'm proposing to reinstitute and actually start up a program of low-interest loans from the state. Third, we do have to, I believe, increase the accessibility of these programs through some of our branch campuses, where we can have a more economical production as well and expand both geographically and use more cost-effective places where it's some of these branch campuses. If we do those three things, we're going to stop this brain drain, and that's what it is. I got to tell you, this is a heartbreaker to me as a parent of 3 and a grandparent of 2. Essentially what we're doing is we're just exporting everybody else's children from around the country. And I love every child wherever they're from, but I love my kids best. And we've got to start serving them to make sure we're in the driver's seat. The Chinese are not waiting. The Germans are not waiting, neither should we.
So here in Seattle, we've got an interesting mix of companies today. We've got the kind of older, established, big companies like Microsoft and Amazon. We've got a number of technology companies from the Bay Area that have now established offices here, from Google to Zynga to Facebook. And then you've got the kind of entrepreneurial success story like Zillow, which is starting from the ground and moving its way up. In this latter category that we're in, there actually aren't a whole lot of them. There's a lot of early stage startups, but startups in Seattle that actually grow and make it big and establish a big presence, there's fewer of those. We're importing the brands in, it seems.
Right.
What can the state do to make Seattle and the state of Washington more attractive for entrepreneurs to start and grow companies here?
Well, first off, anytime I meet a smart computational computer scientist, I'm going to tell them to come to Zillow. That's the very first thing.
Good, we have lots of open jobs.
So no matter where I meet them. Several things. Number one, look, startup capital is tough, particularly now. And we know how important it is that capital is to innovative new companies. I've been very active in this in Congress, wrote a book about how to help startup companies in the clean energy space. And because of that experience, one of my job proposals is to give a research and development tax credit to new Washington startup businesses in the innovative spaces of software, computers, biotech, clean energy, advanced agricultural products. And what we would do, I would propose, is to give a credit to startup businesses, even those who don't have revenue, that they can sell to other companies that do have revenue who have a B&O tax liability. So this is a way to effectively get some original capital to startup companies even before they have revenue. And this is a major stumbling block for new entrepreneurs in our state right now. So, this isn't going to be in the gazillion-dollar range, but sometimes little amounts can help a startup company. And I'm just a believer in the American success story. When I wrote this book about clean energy, I went around the country and I met these people who are starting just incredible companies on a wing of a prayer. They go out and they mortgage their house and start them in their garage. And I still see it happening. I met a woman named Susan Petty. in Seattle. She has a little company called Altarock. They're like 20 employees now. They have the world's leading technology in enhanced geothermal. Alla Weinstein, a woman I met writing this book, she's an expert in offshore wind platforms. Now they have America's first floating offshore wind turbine now in Portugal, generating 2 megawatts of entirely clean energy, and just withstood 100-mile-an-hour winds last week. So we need to help these folks. So that's one way is capitalization. Second is the way we've talked about is, look, we've got to produce brilliant people, meaning we've got to get the skills set graduated. Now, then we have to do the things that make us an attractive place to do business. And there's a lot of things that make us an attractive place to do business, some of which have to do with the ability to recruit talent. Now, if we're going to recruit talent, we got to give them a good place to live. That's why I am the candidate in the race saying we ought to have strong environmental laws in our state. Look, I think my opponent's wrong when he says we ought to be able to repeal our environmental protections if the state of Washington has environmental protections that exceed the federal government's. I don't think we should go down to Arkansas and Mississippi standards. I think this is a recruiting tool. Those Olympics over there are a recruiting tool, and we want to get some smart people to come to Zillow. I think having a progressive set of values that are open and tolerant and inclusive is a recruiting advantage for the state of Washington. I'm the candidate who supports marriage equality in our state. And when we want to recruit people who are forward-looking across this country, I don't think it's a bad thing to say that we are an open, tolerant state. The first state in the Union that embraced a woman's right of choice by a popular vote. And I am the candidate in the race you can count on to protect a woman's right of choice. I think the fact that we have been a forward-looking state on environmental issues, issues important to women, issues important to ethnic diversity, is a recruiting tool. And I am the candidate in this race who supports those values. Then we have to get a state that's good to help businesses grow. And that means when you need a permit, to have a permitting system that is efficient and effective. And I intend to make that by using these lean manufacturing systems. So there's a few things to do. I'm sure others will have suggestions.
And on the environmental issue, what's the difference between what the state can do versus kind of what can be impacted on the federal level? And in particular with the presidential election this year, what can be impacted federally and what can we actually control here in our state?
Well, we do a lot. I think I've never stopped to think about it in percentage terms, but our Puget Sound partnership, I've been very active in clean water issues of Puget Sound, which is of great, great concern to me. You know, it's beautiful and blue, but it's in big, big trouble. Let me mention this because I think this is an example of how to think about environmental issues. About a month ago, you may have read a disturbing story. An oyster growing company in the state of Washington had to move its operations to Hawaii because our waters have too much acid in them. They're too acidic. The pH has gone down too low because all of our carbon pollution has gone into the atmosphere, then been dissolved in the water. It creates acidic acids, acidic conditions, and the baby oysters can't grow. So they've actually had to move their operations to Hawaii. That's pretty disturbing to me as a fifth-generation son of the state of Washington. Now, the solution to that takes both federal and state actions. The federal government is important, but we are equally important in embracing a clean energy future in the state of Washington. That means to have a future where in the state of Washington, we reduce our dependence on fossil fuels. Now, I'm proud of our state because we're leading the country in that regard. We adopted Initiative 937, which made a promise that we're going to adopt more renewable energy in this state. More wind, more solar, more energy efficiency. This building is, I'm told, fairly efficient. And that type of renewable energy eventually is going to save Puget Sound if we have a governor who will have a vision to understand how we create jobs at the same time we're protecting our environment. So the types of things I've talked with you today about our ability to grow clean energy jobs is very important in saving the environment as well. And I embrace and embody that particular vision. You know, you look at the growth in clean energy jobs in our state, and it's significant. World's leading manufacturer of green aerospace products is the Boeing company. They've got the greenest plane in the world with the Boeing 787. The Western Hemisphere's largest manufacturer of solar silicate cells for solar energies in Moses Lake, Washington. We have an economic future here if we have leadership that understands the job-creating potential of that and saving the environment at the same time.
Let's shift topics for a minute. Seattle has had a tough year as far as gun violence. There's been quite a bit in the city, and Zillow was impacted very deeply and personally in May by this. What can you do? What could a governor do from the state level to cut down on gun violence in our state and in our city?
First off, we were affected by Mr. Ferrari's loss. Sam here, Sam Ricketts, working our campaign, was lucky enough to have him as a water polo coach at Roosevelt. And his loss, I assume you're aware of this, it was something that really touched the broader community across the state, in part because of who he was, and it's a loss people really, really felt deeply. So the question is, how do you forge that into action? The first thing I would say is, I don't think there is a silver bullet to this large problem we have in our society. But I would suggest that in approaching gun violence, we got to elect leaders who aren't afraid to take politically difficult stances. Because, gun safety issues are politically pretty controversial. The first thing I would say is that we've got to shed all of our biases and figure out a comprehensive way to deal with this. And when I say comprehensive, I mean comprehensive. We've got to do some of the obvious things, which is to make sure law enforcement has the tools they need to effectively enforce the law. Everything from the state crime lab, where my daughter-in-law works as a forensic scientist, to making sure we've got cops on the beat. And I've supported efforts to do that. I'm an old prosecutor. I used to prosecute drunk drivers for over a decade over in Yakima. So I'm committed to those type of things. Second, I think we've got to think about how we talk about our kids about violence. And this is an issue, because I think we have a group of folks who are coming up a little desensitized to violence. And I think each of us as parents and teachers, from anti-bullying efforts to how we talk to our kids about violence, is just a very, very important thing. And third, I think we cannot shy away from making sure guns do not get in the wrong hands. And I got to tell you, this is something that I've been willing to stand up and be counted on. I used to be a congressman from Yakima. I represented Central Washington in Congress from '92 to '94. And a bill came up to ban assault weapons, and also efforts to close the gun show loophole. I voted to ban assault weapons. I am supportive of closing the gun show loophole. It makes no sense in our state, no sense, to allow people who are on the terrorist watch list or convicted felons to go out to a gun show and buy a handgun in the state of Washington. And I'm the candidate who's supportive of efforts to reduce gun violence by making sure the wrong people don't get access to firearms. Now that's a controversial position, but if we're going to deal with gun violence, we got to have leaders who are willing to stand up and be counted. I am.
And it's a controversial position. Can you just go a little deeper and just explain for those of us who don't know the gun show loophole, what exactly that is and sort of why it's controversial?
Well, we have a system that right now, for many gun purchases, insists that you have a background check, that we make sure you're not on the terrorist watch list, that you're not a convicted felon, and it's illegal for you to have a gun. Unfortunately, there's a loophole you can drive a truck through, which is you can go buy a gun at a, quote, gun show. And there are tens and tens of thousands of guns that are sold, and convicted felons can walk in and buy them by the basketful. Now, that's a loophole that should be closed. Unfortunately, there are folks who are frankly afraid of the National Rifle Association and some other groups. And they are afraid of their political shadows, and they won't stand up and close an obvious loophole that needs to be closed. Now, I've been willing to do that. I was the 217th vote to ban assault weapons. I lost my seat in Yakima in part because of that. But I'm willing to stand up against gun violence in all its forms, in all guises, in all ways, and I'm willing to do that. And we need to close this loophole so that convicted felons cannot get access to these firearms.
Great. I want to open this up to the audience. I know we have a lot of questions that people wanted to ask.
So a couple stories. I really appreciate your questions because I very fundamentally believe you're on the right track. Here's why I believe that. I used to work with kids who are disadvantaged in the summers with the Seattle Public Schools when I was in college. I remember working with a young guy named Harold, and I remember thinking, is he going to be able to be independent? Will he be able? These are kids who are sort of had some challenges. And I remember thinking, is he going to really be able to make it in life? And I lost track of him for 40 years. And I was at the parade in the International District last summer, and I heard this guy call out, "Mr. Inslee, Mr. Inslee." I turned around and I said, "Yes." And he goes, "I'm Harold. Remember me? I used to work with you in these programs." And I said, "Harold, what are you doing?" He goes, "Well, I've been working for Boeing for 35 years. I got 3 kids, a house, a grandkid. Life is great." And I was just, it was so wonderful to see a kid who blossomed, obviously, and I don't know if I had any role in that or not. But here was a kid who had some problems, who had a summer program to help him with some social skills, help him with some work skills, and he made it. I believe in this summer program for exactly the reason you're talking about. Now, to do that, you have to find a way to finance it. And I've committed myself in a variety of ways to do that. Second story is the Lincoln Center. You go down to Tacoma, and this is coming back to these innovative schools we're talking about. The Lincoln Center has a program that's gone out and served, it's kind of mostly a minority youth. They've gone out and they have closed the achievement gap, and they have closed the graduation rate by essentially giving these students a full day and a longer school year. Now, to me, it shouldn't be hugely rocket science. If you're going to give more time for a student, they're going to do better. And we've got to provide that opportunity every way we can for these kids who are at risk. I'm dedicated to doing that. My Innovative Schools grant will help to do that. And thanks a lot for your question. I appreciate it. So I've been married for 39 years. It's a perfect marriage by definition because it's a marriage of a husky and a cougar. So it's absolutely a perfect marriage. I believe very strongly that no politician should be able to tell any of my fellow citizens who they're going to marry or who they're not going to marry. That's a decision for my fellow citizens, not for the politicians. So I'm proud to say I'm the first person to run for governor of the state of Washington, fully embracing marriage equality. And I'm looking forward to our state being the first state to vote for this, as we were the first state to vote to honor a woman's right of choice. This is who we are as a people. We embrace privacy, we embrace liberty, and we embrace equality. This is who we are as Washingtonians. And this will be yet another step forward on bending the arc of the moral universe forward. And I think that's the direction we need to go. On the issue of homelessness, let me suggest that there's unfortunately, a current, most of which is on the opposite side of my party, who thinks that we can just reduce support for people with housing issues and just put that money into education. And that's how we'll solve our educational woes. We'll just cut aid for housing programs, and then we'll put money into education. The problem with that is that it's very difficult to educate a sick, hungry, homeless child. And that's why I'm supportive of these housing programs that, in fact, make sure these kids are ready to be educated. And I think the direction that my opponent has wanted to go, to say we just won't, you know, as housing workers who go out and help people with housing as they retire, we just won't replace them, that doesn't solve the problem. If you don't have someone to help house a child, how do you expect them to be educated if they're living in the back of a '57 Buick? So I disagree with him on his approach. We've got to have a better approach to funding education. Well, I'll tell you what I have found works, and it's really interesting to me. Leadership. There should be no excuses for embracing high standards and an expectation of graduating every single one of our students. And here's the way I believe this. You go to Renton and talk to Mary Alice Huschel, who's the superintendent of schools. Her leadership has increased, and her demand that every teacher and every counselor and every classified employee is having an expectation that every child succeed. And that's how they've increased their graduation rate by 20%. It is her leadership and her dynamic courage. And that's what we've got to put in every principal's office, in every superintendent's office, and every classroom. That's what I believe works, and it does work. You know, Renton hasn't really got a huge new infusion of cash. They haven't had, you know, a multi-billionaire come in and start a charter school. They've had leadership. And that's what I'm going to insist on when I'm governor, and I'm going to build it through this residency program starting with principals. Then we're going to insist on in every classroom through an evaluation system that is rigorous and a personnel decision-making process that is based on that evaluation. And that's going to be a matter of our state policy. If we do this, I believe we can succeed because I've seen it happen. I had a woman who made a big, big difference in my son's life. I had a special ed student, one of my sons, and he had a teacher that just believed in him, did not give up in him. Over in Selah, when we lived in Selah. She now is a principal of a school in Tacoma. She's totally turned around this school because of her leadership. We're going to insist on that when I'm governor. Here's what I believe. I believe that working people ought to have the same rights of whatever they do. Whatever they do, they ought to have the right to have an organization. I can't argue that that's something that is inimically un-American. I don't believe it is. I believe that people who work in any company ought to have the right to form an organization. Now, teachers' unions can help us move towards the future, and I'm seeing some of them do so. If you look at an article about the leader of the Seattle Education Association in the Seattle Times here just last week to see about some of the things they're doing to embrace a more evaluation-directed personnel decision. If you look at Renton, where you have a dynamic leader who is insistent on making progress, you've seen progress. Here's what I think we need, what I think the failing is. It's not so much unions. Unions do which they do, which is to represent their membership. Where we've had a failing is in strong leadership at the other side of the table. And where you have that, you have changes that are positive. And that's what I'm going to insist on when I'm governor. And we'll succeed when we do this. Yeah, I think it makes sense to continue programs to help consumers, homeowners, and businesses to make investments in clean energy for 2 or 3 reasons. Number one, a lot of these renewable energy technologies require an early investment, but they pay off big time over a period of time because they reduce your energy costs. And so finding a way to help the homeowner generate the capital to make that investment, to improve their value of their real estate so Zillow can sell more ads. It's all connected in my plan, you see. So, but helping homeowners get that original capital to make that investment so they can reduce their energy costs is a great plan. As one part of my jobs plan, we have a thing called bonds that will allow you to essentially pay back on your utility bill. You essentially borrow money and pay it back on your utility bill. It's been very successful in other places. It's another mechanism to help homeowners do what you've done. So first, it helps the homeowners. Second, it makes sense from an economic standpoint. Here's the reason why. Look, we know we've got a very archaic system in our country, and that is we've been giving billions of dollars of subsidies to old industries that don't need subsidies. We're giving billions of dollars of tax relief to the oil and gas industry. We're giving subsidies to the coal industry. These are technologies that haven't really changed in, decades. They don't need right now a subsidy, and yet we're giving it to them. So to give some degree of assistance to the new technologies that we know hold the promise of maybe saving Puget Sound, that makes economic sense. We're really just trying to level the playing field here. So we're going to continue to try to help these industries. And the third reason is, look, we're in an international competition. We have got to realize we are in a race to see who's going to dominate the lithium-ion battery industry marketplace. I went to China a few years ago and met with the president and vice president. It was very clear to me that they intended to dominate the lithium-ion battery industries of the world. We came home and started a program to help the growth of our economy. We had 2% of the world's market share before. Now I think it's up to something like 40%. This is a global race. We've got to get in it. And when we do, I think we're going to do really well. First off, we call that consensus building, not cajoling or wrangling. No capitulations. Let me make a comment about that, actually. You said capitulation. I think one of the problems certainly in the nation's capital right now is that too many people think that to build consensus, that's a dirty word. That's a vice. Look, coming together requires all of us to embrace somebody else getting something, not us getting everything. You have to realize if you're going to have bipartisan consensus, you have to work together. That means everybody's got to give a little bit. I understand that. I've worked on a bipartisan basis on a variety of things, on violence against women, on some high-tech issues. I was Biotech Congress Person of the Year with some of my colleagues, both Republicans and Democrats. You need to work across the aisle to build consensus. So that's principle number one. Principle number two is, look, the first order of business is to get back in the business of supporting schools, and that's going to be our first priority, which is to get resources into our educational system from early child education all the way through doctorates in computational science at the U. That's going to be the number one goal of our first term. We're going to head in that direction. Now, the third thing is to embrace some of the savings measures I've talked about of lean management, preventative-based medicine. Now, when the Supreme Court rejected my opponent's effort to take away health reform from Washingtonians, that means we still have an opportunity to embrace cost-saving measures in this state. And we're going to do that by embracing preventative health care. And I'm very excited to move forward on this.
We're heading up at the end of our time. Thank you so much for being with us, Jay.
Thank you very much.
It's thrilling to have you.
Vote.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.